The twin suns burned high above the endless desert, their light turning the sand into waves of gold and fire. A lone human walked slowly through the heat, his clothes torn and dusty, his face hidden behind a cracked visor. His name was Eli, a scavenger, one of the few humans who dared to travel across alien lands searching for scraps of metal to sell. He had seen war, hunger, and cruelty, but that day, he was about to see something that would change his entire life. As he climbed a ridge of broken rocks, he noticed smoke rising from the distance. At first, he thought it was another crashed ship, maybe a chance to earn some credits. But then he heard something, a sound that cut through the dry wind. A cry, weak and trembling. It wasn't a human cry. It was softer, higher, filled with fear. Eli hesitated, his instincts telling him to walk away, but his heart said otherwise. He followed the sound until he found a wrecked convoy. Cages scattered across the sand, metal broken, blood staining the ground. It was a slave transport, the kind used by traders who captured refugees and sold them to the highest bidder. Inside one of the cages, a small alien girl sat curled up, her hands chained, her skin glowing faintly under the sun. She had pale lavender skin, silver-white hair, and eyes that shimmered like stars reflected on water. When she saw him, she pressed her small hands against the bars, whispering in a weak voice, "Help me, please." Eli looked around. There were bodies of dead traders, but also signs that some had survived. He could hear movement nearby, rough voices speaking in an alien tongue. He knew that if he stayed, he could die, but if he left her, she would die instead. Something deep inside him made the choice for him. He grabbed a rusted plasma cutter from his pack and started cutting through the lock, sparks flying into the air. The sound drew attention. Shouts echoed across the sand, and suddenly, 3 alien raiders appeared from behind a dune. They were tall, scaled, and armed with blasters, their eyes burning with anger. Eli's heart raced. He wasn't a soldier, he was just a scavenger. But he picked up a metal rod and charged forward, swinging with desperation. The first alien fired. The shot missed. Eli hit him in the face, then rolled to the side as another shot grazed his shoulder. He screamed in pain, but kept fighting. He slammed the cutter into one of the raider's armor joints. Sparks burst out, and the creature fell. The third raider aimed his gun, but before he could fire, Eli threw a sand grenade from his belt. A cloud of dust exploded, blinding everyone. When the air cleared, the raiders were gone, retreating, shouting threats into the wind. Eli fell to his knees, breathing heavily, his shoulder bleeding. He looked at the cage. The lock was melted, and the little alien girl crawled out, shaking. She stared at him with wide eyes full of disbelief and fear. He smiled weakly and said, "You're safe now." She didn't understand all his words, but she understood his kindness. She touched his wounded arm and whispered something in her own language, a soft sound like music. Then, from the horizon, a bright light appeared, a rescue ship approaching fast. Eli helped her stand, and she held onto him tightly as the wind roared around them. When the ship landed, armored soldiers stepped out, clearly from her world. They looked shocked to see a human with one of their own. One soldier grabbed her hand and tried to pull her away, but the girl turned back to Eli, her eyes full of tears. She reached into her broken necklace and pressed a small metal piece into his hand, a half-shaped pendant glowing faintly. "Keep this," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I'll come back one day." The soldiers took her aboard, and the ship rose into the burning sky, leaving dust and silence behind. Eli stood there, holding the pendant tightly, watching until the light disappeared into the stars. The wind howled again, whispering across the dunes, carrying the faint echo of her promise. He didn't know her name then, but he knew he would never forget her face. That night, as the desert cooled and the twin suns sank behind the hills, Eli looked up at the endless sky and whispered, "Someday, I'll see you again." The stars didn't answer, but one of them seemed to shine a little brighter, as if listening. And in that silent desert, under 1,000 alien suns, began a story that would echo across galaxies. The story of a human and an alien queen, bound by one moment of courage that defied the universe. 20 years passed since that day in the desert. The twin suns that once burned above Eli's head were long behind him now, replaced by the cold light of distant stars. He had grown older, his hands rough from years of work, his eyes tired but sharp. He worked as an engineer aboard a deep space mining station orbiting a dead moon, fixing machines that no one else wanted to touch. Life was quiet, simple, but empty. Every night, he would sit by the viewport, holding the half-shaped pendant the alien girl had given him. Its glow had faded, yet he kept it close, as if the warmth of her promise still lived inside it. Sometimes he wondered if she had survived, if she had grown up among her people, if she even remembered the human who saved her. But the galaxy was vast, and humans were small. Hope was a dangerous thing in such a place. Still, Eli couldn't let it die. One evening, the mining station shook violently, alarms blaring. Eli rushed to the control deck, thinking it was another asteroid impact. But the scanners showed something else, a fleet of royal ships entering orbit, their hulls shining like silver flame. No one knew who they belonged to, until the central comms received a message marked with an imperial seal. The crew gasped as the name appeared on the screen, the sovereign fleet of the Galactic Queen Lyra. The commander of the station froze. They all knew her name. The mysterious ruler who had risen from nowhere and united more than 50 alien worlds. Some said she was a warrior, others said she was divine. But no one had ever seen her face in person. And now, her fleet was right above them. Then came the second shock. The message wasn't addressed to the station, it was addressed to one man. Eli Morrow. The commander turned to him in disbelief. Why would the Queen of the Galaxy send a personal message to a mechanic? He asked. Eli had no answer. His heart pounded as he approached the console. The message opened with a symbol, a crescent star, the same carved pattern on the pendant he had kept for 2 decades. Then a voice filled the room, soft, calm, but powerful. Human named Eli, it said. If you still hold the light I gave you, come to me. Everyone stared at him. The message repeated once more, then vanished, leaving only silence and the hum of machines. Eli stood frozen, memories rushing back like a storm. The desert, the cage, her eyes, her promise. Could it really be her? Could the little girl he once saved be this queen the galaxy now feared and worshipped? The next day, a shuttle from the royal fleet arrived, sleek and bright like molten silver. The soldiers aboard didn't speak much. They only said, "You are summoned by the queen." Eli felt both fear and wonder. He packed his tools, his old jacket, and of course, the pendant. The crew watched him go, whispering as if he were walking into legend. The shuttle launched silently, cutting through the void. Through the window, Eli saw her fleet. Thousands of ships moving in perfect formation, surrounding a massive capital vessel shaped like a crystal crown. He had seen many starships, but nothing like this. The colors danced across the hull like living light. He felt small, yet strangely calm. He didn't know what waited for him at the end of this journey, but his heart told him one truth. She hadn't forgotten. As the shuttle approached the main hangar, he noticed statues built into the ship's design, tall figures carved from shining metal, each depicting a woman holding a broken chain. He realized what it meant. Her empire had been built on freedom, the very thing he gave her long ago. When the shuttle docked, a group of guards bowed their heads. One of them said quietly, "The Queen has awaited your arrival for many cycles." Eli followed them through glowing corridors filled with alien technology and symbols he couldn't read. The air smelled of flowers and ozone, the atmosphere heavy with reverence. Every step felt like walking deeper into a dream. Finally, the doors ahead opened with a low hum, revealing a vast chamber bathed in golden light. At the far end stood a figure wearing a long silver cloak and a crown that shimmered with starlight. She turned slowly, and his heart stopped. Her eyes, still the same silver hue he remembered, met his across the room. The pendant in his hand began to glow softly again. The queen smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. And in a voice both royal and familiar, she whispered, "I told you I would return." The guards bowed. The stars outside pulsed brighter, and in that moment, the boy who once saved a slave girl met the queen of 1,000 worlds. And time itself seemed to bow before their story. Eli stood frozen as the great golden doors closed behind him. The chamber stretched endlessly, built from glowing crystal and silver metal. Dozens of alien banners hung from the high ceiling, each carrying the symbol of a crescent star. Guards in shining armor lined the path, their heads bowed as he walked past. He felt like a ghost in a place meant for legends. But at the far end of the hall, upon a platform carved from starlight itself, stood the queen. Her cloak shimmered like liquid silver, and her long hair glowed faintly under the soft blue light. When she turned, her face was both familiar and strange. She had grown, no longer the frightened girl from the desert, but a ruler whose presence filled the room. Yet in her eyes, those silver eyes that once looked at him through the bars of a cage, he saw the same warmth, the same soul. For a moment, time seemed to stop. She smiled softly and whispered his name, Eli. He dropped to one knee without thinking. My queen, he said quietly, unsure if his voice even reached her. But Lyra stepped down from the dais, her steps light yet powerful, each one echoing across the chamber. When she reached him, the guard stepped back, and even the air seemed to hold its breath. She placed her hand on his shoulder, her voice trembling slightly. Do not kneel to me, Eli. I should be the one kneeling before you. Before he could respond, she did exactly that. The entire royal court gasped as the Galactic Queen, ruler of half the known universe, knelt before a simple human engineer. Lyra bowed her head, her silver hair falling across her face. You saved me when I was nothing, she said softly. You gave me freedom and hope when I had no one. Her voice broke slightly, and her words echoed like music through the chamber. I built this empire on that hope, on your kindness. Eli felt his heart twist with emotion. He reached out and gently lifted her up, shaking his head. I didn't do anything special, he said. I just couldn't walk away. She looked up at him, eyes shimmering. That is what makes it special. The court watched in silence, unsure what to make of this human who stood beside their queen like an equal. Lyra turned to them and spoke in her native tongue, her voice clear and powerful. The translator drones echoed her words in every language. This is Eli of Earth, she declared, the man whose courage gave birth to our freedom. The guards and nobles bowed deeply, some even placing their weapons on the floor in respect. Eli stood there stunned, the pendant in his hand glowing faintly again. He looked at her, speechless, as she smiled through tears. When the ceremony ended, Lyra led him to a quiet balcony overlooking the stars. The view stretched beyond sight, nebulae swirling like oceans of color, fleets moving silently across the horizon. This is my home now, she said softly, but it never truly felt like home until you came. Eli leaned against the railing, his voice low. You remembered. She turned to him, her gaze soft. I could never forget. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the hum of the ship filled the silence. Finally, Lyra reached into her cloak and revealed something. The other half of the pendant he had carried for 20 years. She pressed it against his piece, and the two halves joined perfectly, forming a glowing star symbol. It pulsed once, sending a faint shimmer through the air. When I became queen, she said, I kept this as a promise, that one day, I would find you again. Eli's throat tightened. He wanted to say 100 things, but all that came out was a whisper. You found me. Lyra smiled faintly. No, Eli, you found me first. The stars reflected in her eyes as she looked toward the galaxy beyond. She spoke again, her voice filled with emotion. There is so much I want to show you, so much I want you to see. He nodded quietly. Then show me. And as the great starships drifted past them, their lights reflecting off the balcony like falling fireflies, Eli realized the truth, that in saving one lost girl long ago, he had unknowingly saved a universe. From that night forward, every world under her crown spoke of the mysterious human who walked beside their queen. Some called him the guardian of the queen, others called him the human star. But for Lyra, he would always be the same boy who broke her chains under the burning twin suns. And somewhere deep within her heart, she knew this was only the beginning of their story. The night aboard the royal flagship was calm, but Eli couldn't sleep. He stood alone on the balcony, watching the stars drift past like glowing embers in a dark ocean. Behind him, the great city of light aboard the Queen's vessel hummed softly. Every tower, every crystal bridge, every shining corridor existed because of her will. But beneath that beauty, Eli could sense something else, a quiet sadness hidden behind her eyes. When Lyra joined him, she wasn't wearing her crown. Just a simple cloak, the same color as moonlight. For the first time, she looked less like a ruler and more like the same girl he'd once found in that desert cage. "Do you ever wish you could go back?" she asked softly, standing beside him. "Back to when everything was simpler, before I was queen." Eli smiled faintly. "I wish I could go back to before all the wars, before people forgot what kindness meant." Lyra nodded, her voice quiet. "The galaxy remembers power, not kindness. That's why I had to become both." He turned to her, confused, and she met his gaze. "You deserve to know what really happened." She led him to the inner chamber, a place no one else was allowed. There, holograms flickered to life, showing her memories. He saw her younger self after the rescue ship took her. The soldiers who brought her home had betrayed her, selling her again to the same slave lords who once owned her. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "They said my freedom was worthless, that mercy was weakness." Eli clenched his fists as the images played. Battles, prisons, rebellion. Lyra continued. "I escaped. I fought, and I made them pay, world by world." The images shifted, fleets rising, empires burning. She united broken species, freed colonies, and destroyed the trade networks that once sold lives like property. But victory had a price. "Millions died before peace began," she whispered. "And even now, the old lords hide in the dark, rebuilding." Eli looked at her with pain in his eyes. "You've carried all this alone." She shook her head slowly. "Not anymore." She stepped closer, placing her hand over his. "I want to end it completely," she said. "The last of the slavers, the ones who started it all, they're gathering again." Eli frowned. "Then you have to fight them." Lyra's voice softened. "I can fight them, but I need something I no longer have, faith." He looked at her, puzzled. "Faith in what?" "In humanity," she whispered. "In you." The words struck him like a meteor. He had been just a scavenger once, a man who fixed broken machines, not led armies. But Lyra saw something else in him, the spark that had once saved her. She led him to a massive star map glowing in the air. At its center was a red zone marked with symbols of fire. "This is the Crimson Sector," she said, "where the slave empire was born, where they still breed and trade the forgotten." Her voice hardened. "They call themselves the Chain Lords, and they are coming for me." Eli looked at the map, then at her. "You want me to go there?" he asked quietly. Lyra nodded. "Not alone. I will send my finest ships, but I need you to guide them, not as a soldier, but as the one who remembers why we fight." Eli hesitated, unsure. "I'm no hero." She smiled softly. "Neither was I, until you made me believe I could be." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then the star map flickered again, showing enemy movements approaching the outer colonies. Lyra's face darkened, the weight of 1,000 worlds resting on her shoulders. She turned to him and said, "If we fail, everything we built, everything you inspired, will fall." Eli looked down at the pendant still glowing faintly in his hand. The same light that once guided him through the desert now seemed to burn brighter. He nodded firmly. "Then we don't fail." Lyra's eyes softened, relief flickering across her face. She whispered, "Then let's finish what we started 20 years ago." The chamber lights dimmed as the war alarms began to echo across the ship. Outside, entire fleets started to move, engines lighting up the void like new suns. The Queen and the humans stood side by side, their silhouettes framed by the glow of the coming storm. For the first time since the day he freed her, they were no longer savior and survivor. They were allies, bound by history, by pain, and by a promise made under twin suns long ago. And as the royal fleet roared toward war, the galaxy would soon remember the name of the human who once saved a girl. Because this time, he would help her save the stars. The silence of space shattered as the royal fleets prepared for war. Thousands of ships drifted into formation, their hulls glowing like constellations come alive. From her command bridge, Queen Lyra watched the endless expanse before her, her expression calm, but her hands trembling slightly behind her back. She had led many wars, but this one was different. This one would decide the fate of everything she built. Eli stood beside her, wearing a simple engineer's uniform, a symbol of the humanity that once inspired her. Around them, alien officers rushed to stations, voices overlapping, lights blinking in rhythm with the heartbeat of war. He looked at the star map, lines of red spreading fast toward the outer colonies. The Chain Lords move faster than we thought, he said quietly. Lyra nodded, her voice low but steady. They've waited 20 years for revenge. They won't stop until I'm gone. Eli took a deep breath. Then let's not give them the chance. Lyra turned to him, a faint smile touching her lips. You've changed, Eli. He shook his head. No, I just stopped running. Moments later, the alarms wailed through the command deck. Enemy fleets emerging from hyperspace, their black ships shaped like jagged claws, each one pulsing with crimson light. The first blast struck the shields, shaking the entire vessel. Lyra's voice rang through the comms, clear and powerful. For every world they enslaved, for every life they took, today we rise. Her words echoed through the fleet, turning fear into fire. Thousands of pilots roared their reply, engines flaring as they charged into the void. Eli ran to the lower deck, where his engineering team was working on a weapon he had designed, a plasma shield that could protect entire ships instead of just one. The system wasn't ready, but they didn't have time. He looked at the burning readouts, then at the faces of the crew. Activate it manually, he ordered, even if it burns out. But it could overload, one officer began. Then we overload. Eli said, better we burn than break. He slammed the switch. Light exploded across the fleet, a shimmering wall of blue energy spreading like a wave. Enemy blasts hit, but the shield held, bending under pressure yet refusing to break. Cheers erupted through the comms. From the command deck, Lyra watched the humans' plans save them from destruction, her heart pounding with pride. She whispered softly, he always finds a way. But victory came at a cost. The energy surge damaged their reactors, and one section of the flagship began to fail. Smoke filled the corridor, alarms flashing red. Eli rushed into the flames, coughing, searching for survivors. When he reached the reactor core, sparks and plasma flared dangerously close to meltdown. He could barely see, his suit's visor cracked, but he worked anyway, fingers trembling as he rewired systems by instinct. Above him, the battle raged. Lyra's ship shook violently, but she refused to retreat. Her voice echoed through every speaker. Do not falter, hold the line. Suddenly, her command screen flickered, showing Eli's location deep inside the burning reactor chamber. She froze, realization striking like lightning. He was sacrificing himself to keep her ship alive. Without hesitation, she tore off her crown and ran from the bridge, ignoring the calls of her guards. Smoke filled the corridors, flames licking the walls, but she kept going, her cloak catching fire, her lungs burning. She reached the chamber just as the reactor began to pulse uncontrollably. Eli, she shouted through the chaos. He turned, his face covered in ash, sweat dripping from his brow. What are you doing here? He yelled. Get back. But she shook her head, voice breaking. Not this time. I'm not leaving you again. Together they worked side by side, hands moving through fire and light. The reactor roared like a beast, threatening to tear the ship apart. At the last second, Lyra linked her neural circuit to the system, amplifying the stabilizer's power. Energy surged through them both, pain and light blending into one blinding moment. Then silence. When the smoke cleared, the reactor was stable, the ship intact. Lyra collapsed to her knees, exhausted but alive. Eli caught her, his arms shaking. She looked up at him, her silver eyes dim but full of warmth. You saved me again, she whispered weakly. He smiled through the pain. I think this makes us even. Outside, the fleet saw the flagship still standing, its lights blazing across the darkness like a new sun. The sight broke the enemy's will. One by one, their ships retreated, fading into the cold void. The Chain Lord's fleet was defeated, and the galaxy cheered. But inside the damaged ship, there were no cheers, only quiet. Eli and Lyra stood together amid the smoke and ruin. Neither spoke, but both knew this victory had changed something deeper than war. They were no longer bound by a promise. They were bound by destiny. And somewhere beyond the stars, history began to write their names side by side. Not as queen and human, but as two souls who refused to let the universe break them. The war was over, but the silence that followed felt heavier than battle. The royal flagship drifted among the stars, surrounded by debris and the faint glow of victory. Repairs had begun, but the damage was deep. Inside her private chambers, Queen Lyra sat beside the large viewing window, her crown placed quietly on the table. Outside, the stars reflected in her eyes like scattered tears. Eli entered slowly, still wearing his burnt jacket and bandaged arm. The guards saluted but did not speak. They could feel the weight between their ruler and the human who had once saved her life. Lyra turned as he approached, her expression calm, yet distant. "You should rest," he said gently. "You almost died." She smiled faintly, her voice soft. "So did you." For a while, they said nothing. Only the hum of the engines filled the silence. Then Lyra stood and walked closer to him, her movements graceful but weary. "There's something I must tell you, Eli," she whispered. "Something I should have told you long ago." He frowned, unsure. "What is it?" She looked at her reflection in the window, her hand pressed against the cold glass. "My kind, we are not like humans," she said quietly. "Our bodies age differently. Our hearts beat slower. Our years last longer." Eli blinked, not understanding. Lyra turned to face him, her silver eyes glimmering with sorrow. "While 20 years passed for you," she said, "only 2 have passed for me." The words sank into the air like falling stones. Eli stepped back, confused. "You mean, you'll live longer than me?" Lyra nodded. "Much longer, perhaps centuries." Her voice trembled. "And when your time ends, mine will only be beginning." Eli felt a cold emptiness inside, the kind that no victory could fill. He stared at her, trying to speak, but no words came. She stepped closer, reaching for his hand. "When I became queen, I made a vow to never forget the one who freed me, no matter how many lifetimes passed." Her fingers were cold, her touch gentle. "But I cannot stop time, Eli," she whispered, "and time will take you from me." He looked down, his heart breaking silently. He had fought slavers, saved fleets, and faced death beside her. But against time, he was powerless. Lyra lifted the pendant that still hung from his neck, the same one he had carried since the desert. The glow had changed, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. "This light," she said, "it was made from my life force. It connects us." She removed her own half and pressed it against his. The two halves fused, forming a single glowing star that shimmered between their palms. "If you wear it," she said, "you will never be forgotten, not by me, not by the stars." He smiled weakly, trying to hide the ache in his chest. "You really became a queen," he said quietly, "and I'm still just a scavenger." Lyra shook her head, her voice breaking. "No, you became something greater. You became my reason to believe." They stood there in silence, the stars watching like silent witnesses. Then, outside, the galaxy turned, nebulae swirling like slow rivers of color. Lyra spoke again, her tone soft but strong. "I can't change what we are, Eli, but I can promise this." He looked up at her, waiting. She continued, "When you're gone, I will remember you in every dawn, in every star that rises. I will build monuments not of stone, but of memory." Eli felt a tear slip down his cheek. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a sigh. "You talk like I'm already leaving." Lyra smiled sadly. "Humans always do. They leave too soon." He reached up, brushing a tear from her face. "Then promise me one thing," he said, "that you'll keep fighting for what we started." Lyra nodded slowly. "I swear it, as long as I breathe." The pendant between them pulsed brighter, then dimmed softly, its light settling like a heartbeat between two souls. That night, they stood side by side, watching the endless horizon of stars. No words, no promises, only the quiet understanding of 2 lives woven together by fate. She would live on, a queen eternal, while his days would fade like the last light of dusk. But in that moment, neither thought of loss. They thought only of how far they had come from that burning desert where a frightened girl once whispered for help, and the human who answered her call. Outside, the fleet glided silently through the darkness, carrying their story across the galaxy. And somewhere deep in the heart of that silence, the stars themselves seemed to whisper their names together. A queen who would never die, and a human who taught her how to live. Many years passed, and the galaxy changed again. The great wars ended, peace spread across the stars, and the name of Queen Lyra became a symbol of unity and hope. But time, as it always does, moved forward, slow for her kind and swift for his. Eli grew older, his hair turning gray, his once steady hands trembling when he held tools. Yet he never left her side, not until his final breath. The day he closed his eyes for the last time, the sky above her palace dimmed. Across 100 worlds, the stars flickered as if bowing their heads. Lyra sat beside him in silence, her silver eyes filled with grief too deep for tears. He had lived a life of quiet strength, and she had watched every moment. In the end, he smiled at her, whispering the same words he once said long ago in the desert. "You're safe now." When his heart stopped, the pendant they shared glowed one final time. Its light spread through the room like a sunrise, warm and endless. Lyra held it close to her chest, her voice shaking. "You kept your promise, Eli. Now it's my turn." Years turned into decades, then centuries, but the queen never aged. Her empire grew, her name carved into history, yet her heart remained the same. Every night, she stood on the same balcony where they once watched the stars together. The universe changed, but the memory of one human never faded. She ordered great monuments to be built, not for her victories, but for him. On the desert world where they first met, a towering statue rose, a human holding a star in his hand, beside a young alien girl looking toward the sky. At its base were words written in every language of the known galaxy. Freedom began with kindness. Travelers came from far worlds to see it. Children touched the metal hands and whispered his name like a prayer. They told stories of how a single act of compassion saved the stars from darkness. Generations grew up believing that even the smallest light can change the course of the universe. And Lyra, the undying queen, kept her silent vow. She visited the statue every century, walking barefoot through the same sand that once burned her feet as a child. She placed a single flower at its base, its petals glowing like the pendant's old light. Then she would stand quietly and whisper, "I remember." Some said they saw her speak to the stars, her lips moving as if in conversation with someone unseen. Others claimed that when she closed her eyes, a second shadow appeared beside her, a faint human outline made of light, smiling at her. But Lyra never denied it. She believed Eli was still out there, in the glow of every sunrise, in the warmth of every rescued soul. Over the centuries, his story became legend. Bards sang of the human who defied death. Historians wrote of the queen who ruled with compassion instead of fear. And somewhere deep in the archives of her palace, his old jacket still hung, carefully preserved. Beside it rested the fused pendant, still glowing faintly as if keeping watch. One evening, as Lyra walked through the Grand Hall of Heroes, she stopped before his statue. The air was quiet, dust drifting like starlight through the golden beams. She spoke softly. "They remember you, Eli, just like I promised." Her voice echoed gently, carrying through the hall. "They call me Queen, but you were the one who made me believe I could be more than a survivor." The stars outside shimmered brighter, as if answering. Lyra smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the endless expanse beyond. She turned toward the balcony, whispering, "One day, when my time finally ends, I'll find you again." And as the night stretched on, the galaxy glowed with the light of 1,000 worlds freed by one act of mercy. In that vast sea of stars, one light always shone brighter than the rest. They called it the human star, and its glow never faded. Because it wasn't just a star, it was a promise. A promise that kindness would outlive death, that love would outlast time, and that a single human's heart could change the fate of the universe forever.